So reading from Luke chapter 10. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus said. "Do this and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, and he asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man who is going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes and beat him and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to go by down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too the Levite, when he came down to the place and saw him, he passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan who had travelled, but as a Samaritan as he travelled came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, poured on oil and wine, but then he put the man on his own donkey and brought him to an inn and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have." Which of these 3 do you think was the neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? The expert in law replied, "The one who had the mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise."
Thanks, James. I'll need my remote, though. No, you can have that. I'll take this. Oh, you're going to find me another drink. Welcome, everybody, to the bridge. Thanks, James, for reading that. As I was last night, I was going through the talk. I'm thinking I got to have somebody read this, and I thought, like, all the rest of you have a boring voice, right? And I'm thinking, oh, James would be perfect. And when you walked in, I got James. One quick announcement, and I hesitate to do this, but first announcement is Church in the Park tonight. New Life's Girls Home is leading the service in the park. If you're interested in that, they do some pretty incredible work. So I encourage you to go to Church in the Park. I think it's at 6 o'clock downtown. The other thing that I hesitate to do, because you guys are going to be tough to wrangle in, but I think it's a really good idea for you to stand up again and just say hi to your neighbors, welcome them to the bridge, ask them if they're going to the Church in the Park tonight. All right? And if you're talking to James, tell him he did a great job. All right. So I'm hoping at this point that you all feel welcome here to the bridge, and we're going to have some time after the service. Coffee doesn't go away too quickly, so you can maybe top up your coffee after the service and visit with a few more people, get to know them. Matt asked this question. How many know this story, the Good Samaritan?
Wrote a song about it.
You wrote a song about it?
Sherry did.
Oh, nice.
I wrote the music. She wrote the lyrics.
Oh, nice. We'll have to hear it. Even if you never ever went to church before, there's a good chance that you've heard somebody called a Good Samaritan, right? And so this is a story that most of us know, and as Matt was saying and was talking about last week, really it's our responsibility to prepare the soil, our soil, to receive whatever seed comes into it. And this is a tough one for a lot of us because we've heard the story a million times, and we're able to be like sort of this packed down path where we've already figured it out, right? We've heard this story till it's packed us down. And so the job this morning is to try and listen, to try and really engage in this story just one more time, just to see what Jesus is saying to the people around him as he's telling this story about the Good Samaritan. So we're just going to run through it again quickly. Well, that was a lie. We're going to take a lot longer to go through it than James took to go through it. So it starts off with this expert in the law coming up to Jesus, and he says, "So tell me the deal. Well, what do I have to do to inherit eternal life?" And so Jesus says to him, and Jesus does this a lot. If you don't know Jesus, Jesus often answers your question with another question. And so that's what he does here. He says, "So you know the law. What's written in the law?" And so this expert in the law, he pulls out two sections of the Old Testament and puts them together, which if you've read elsewhere in the gospel, Jesus does that as well, because they all knew this one: love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind. And that's one section, and then Jesus says the other one is like it. And so this expert in the law may have heard Jesus say this before, but this expert was able to tie this other part in that says, "And love your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus responds to him saying, "Yeah, you got it. That's exactly it. You do that, you're going to live." And then this expert in the law, it goes, he wanted to justify himself. Now, in the past when I've been reading that, I read it as he's an expert in the law. He wants to make himself look smart. But that's not actually what it says, and maybe you're smarter than me and you caught this much quicker than I did. But that's not at all. This is not about appearances. The question isn't about appearances. The question is, am I good enough? Because the question is, and if you get this question gets answered through the entire parable. This might be the question that Jesus is answering. He's answering this, am I justified? Because justify is to render just or innocent. So this expert in the law, he kind of got this first part. He goes, okay, he wanted to justify himself. He gets the love the Lord your God with everything. Okay, I'm trying. I kind of get that. But I'm not sure if I'm okay on the neighbor side, because he asks this, so who's my neighbor? Because the neighbor on the left of me shares my political views and I like him. But the neighbor on the right, well, how can you love someone who thinks that way? So this expert in the law is trying to narrow this in, because it's difficult to love those people. So do I have to? Am I okay with just loving the good people? Am I just? Am I justified in my actions? And so, Jesus responds to this with this. He says, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. And when I read that, I've never been to Israel. I've never actually physically seen what that looks like, but the people that are hearing this story know exactly what Jesus is talking about. And so there's a road from Jerusalem down to Jericho that's about 18 miles long, and most of it, it's a massive elevation drop. It goes down into the valley where the Dead Sea is, which is the lowest, around the Dead Sea is the lowest dry land elevation in the world. It's well below sea level, which is absolutely baffling for me to figure out. And it's hot. It's a bowl. The sun bakes down in it. So if you were to think about this, it's kind of like, and I tried to get a few distances, like walking from here to Cardiff, but through the desert. Or here to MacArthur's Mills, or like Cumbermere area. If you can think about that, walking that distance, and how steep this grade is, and that it is arid, it is dry, it is hot. And you've got this bowl where the sun's just baking on you. So when Jesus says, this guy was walking from Jerusalem to Jericho, that is what people are thinking about. That's a tough walk in a very hazardous environment. And so, Jesus replied, he was traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. And then the rest of it goes like this. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. And the people that are hearing this story are going, half dead? That man's dead. Like, think about the environment that he is in. You don't get to be half dead there. You're going to die. You're exposed. You're in this environment. There are lots of hazards in the desert. And so as people are hearing this story, this is what they're hearing. So it's like a newspaper article that says that a man was attacked on the road to Jericho. He eventually died. That's how they would hear this story. But then there's a little bit of light here, right? A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, and we're thinking, good, it's a priest. Right? Oh, this should be good. He passed by on the other side. And we go, jerk. Right? We think, come on. We were hoping better from somebody, a man of God. But the people that were listening to this story would know it differently than we would perceive it. They would go, of course he passed on the other side. He's a priest. And a priest isn't allowed to touch a dead person. What happens if this priest goes, are you okay, and realizes that the guy is dead after he tried to shake him to see whether he was alive? The rules go like this. The Lord said to Moses, tell these things to Aaron's sons, the priests. Now, priests are all descendants of Aaron, of the tribe of Levi. The priest must not make himself unclean by touching a dead person. It's a rule. It's part of his job. He is not, talk about union rules, right? He is not allowed to touch a dead person. And so as the people hear this story, and as we think about it in terms of whether he's just in not touching this person, they're going, yeah, of course. He can't touch a dead person. He is fully justified in walking by this because his duty is to serve God in the temple. So he can't defile himself. The story goes on. A priest went down and he saw him. He passed on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. Now, if you understand kind of the structure of the Jewish nation, there are 12 tribes. The Levites were the tribe that were dedicated to the service of the temple. And the priests were the descendants of Aaron that were part of the Levite tribe. Just stick with me on this. The Levites were very limited in what they could do in business outside of serving in the temple. They received most of their money from what they did when they served in the temple. Right? So, this is this person's job. And we can imply from the story that if a priest is traveling on this road and a Levite is traveling right after him, that they are probably headed to the temple. Because what would happen is the service of the temple was divided up into various periods. So a certain segment of the Levites would serve in the temple for a 2-week period, and then they would be off for 6 months, which is also a pretty sweet gig. But they would then serve again for a couple weeks. Like it was, and I don't know the exact period of time, but they would serve for a period, and then they would be off. They had fields around their cities, but they weren't really able to expand beyond that. And so, why wouldn't this Levite touch this person? Well, here are the rules. Whoever touches a human corpse will be unclean for 7 days. They must purify themselves with water on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. Then they will be clean. But if they do not purify themselves on the 3rd and the 7th days, they will not be clean. If they fail to purify themselves after touching a human corpse, they defile the Lord's tabernacle. They must be cut off from Israel. Like, it's a little bit risky for them. So if this guy was heading up to do his 2-week work period at the temple and all of a sudden gets cut in half, I'm pretty sure that would have a significant impact on the income that he gets. He is absolutely justified in not helping this person. He can't touch a dead person. He won't be able to go to work. I can't get involved in this. Now, I know none of you have ever thought that, right? Like, what I do is too important to, risk not being able to do it. Am I just? Am I measuring up? Am I loving my neighbor? Because I've got other responsibilities too. So how much of the, love my neighbor should get involved in my other rest of my life? Am I just in how I am treating my neighbor? The story goes on. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him. I want to pause there for a minute. Now, if you've been in church for a long time, you've heard a lot about the Samaritans. I want to recap that, but I also, you maybe don't know the depth of the disdain that the Israelites had for the Samaritans and the Samaritans had for the Israelites. They hated each other. They are the remnant of the northern 10 tribes that were taken captive by Assyria. The lower tribes, Judah, was also taken captive, but they were taken captive by the Babylonians. And when the Babylonians took them and exiled them to Babylon, they allowed them to remain a nation, and they were able to re-enter into Jerusalem as a nation. They were given a lot of privileges to hang on to their national identity. That's the lower portion. But the Samaritans, the northern portion, they were taken captive by the Assyrians. And what the Assyrians did is they conquered a lot of countries, and what they did was they put everybody in a bag and they shook them up and then spread them out again. Right? They took people from one nation that they had conquered and they moved them into another nation that they had conquered. They took people out of that nation and put them in another nation, and they were working at assimilating everybody to be essentially Assyrian, which is just like a great big mixed bag of different people. And so this northern tribe was far from purely Jewish, far from Israelite. They were just a mixed bag of multiple nationalities, and there was a remnant in there of what was originally the 10 tribes. They didn't worship in Jerusalem, and the northern and southern tribes had fought before either of them went into captivity, but they didn't worship in Jerusalem, which is where God had set up his temple. They worshiped on Mount, and I'm going to get this wrong, Gerizim. No, I got it right. Kind of. Gerizim. And it was considered to be a sacred mountain. So about 100 years before Jesus was born, what happened? There was a priest in Jerusalem that said, this is crazy. They shouldn't be worshiping out there. We should be all worshiping together. So he took an army and he destroyed the temple at Mount Gerizim and destroyed the city that was near it. That kind of made the Samaritans angry, right? So over the next 100 years, there's still a whole lot going on, but right about the time that Jesus was born, there was a group of Samaritans that snuck into Jerusalem, and they defiled the temple courts by putting some human bones in the courts. Like, this is pretty fresh. They had been going back and forth, and they absolutely hated each other. They didn't care. Their life would be better for the Samaritans if the people in Jerusalem didn't exist. And life would be better for the people in Jerusalem if the Samaritans didn't exist. That's how they viewed life. Do you have any people in your life like that? Just asking. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. See, if anybody was justified in leaving this Israelite on the side of the road dying, it was this Samaritan. He could say, yeah, this guy deserved it. He could look and say, well, it's a series of life choices that has put him in this situation. It's not my problem. And so the Samaritan, when he took pity on him, in the eyes of the people listening to this story, he absolutely had the most justification in not helping this person. And yet, he took pity. He stopped. He went to him, bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. See, the first thing he did, he'd obviously had St. John's first aid, right? And was prepared to help somebody who he found in this situation. And he went and he bandaged his wounds and he cared for him. He supplied first aid in that situation. And then he took on advanced paramedic role, because then he put the man on his donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. I don't know what the Samaritan's plan was for the day, but I can guarantee that it wasn't to get distracted by some poor guy who was dying on the side of the road. So he stopped whatever he was doing, and he took this man, put him on a donkey, took him to an inn, and then it doesn't even stop there. The next day, he took out 2 denarii, and a denarii is a day's wage, right? For a general worker in Jerusalem, or in the Roman Empire at that point, it's what a soldier got for a day's work. So it's like taking 2 days' pay on top of whatever he paid for the inn, and he gave it to the man and said, look after him, and I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. And so Jesus tells this story to this expert in the law who is asking, okay, am I doing enough for my neighbor? And he asks him this, so which of these do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? And the expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. The one who had mercy on him. There's a little bit in that answer. Some people have suggested it kind of marks the disdain that the Jews had for the Samaritans because he couldn't just say the Samaritan, which could be the case. I actually read it as the expert in the law actually got what it was to be a neighbor to extend mercy. Now, as I listen to this story and I dig into what is going on there, I can come up with all kinds of justification not to extend mercy to my neighbors. Right? One of my favorite approaches to coming up with an excuse not to help is to say, well, they made bad decisions that got them in this situation. It's not my fault. Anybody else ever done that? Or, here's another great one. They are such awful people to live next to. Why should I help them? My life would be better if they didn't live next door. By the way, I have great neighbors. Some of them are here. They put up with our wedding last weekend, didn't call the cops. It was awesome. But we can come up with all kinds of excuses not to help. We can come up with all kinds of justifiable, rational reasons not to extend mercy. We are really good at it. And this is what I get out. This is the big story for me in this story. You aren't special. What you do is not so important that you can justify being a bad neighbor. Everyone can justify not helping. Everyone has a reason not to help. You're not that special. See, as Jesus tells this story in this parable, it's not just a story that he told. He demonstrated it. And he demonstrated it in an extremely powerful way that I think a lot of people miss in some of the stories that we read through the Gospels. But I want to take you to one that only makes sense in the context of Jesus demonstrating to us what it is to be a neighbor. The story goes like this. It's in the first chapter of Mark. Mark seems to start out with this, saying, this is important, you got to get this. Said, a man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, if you are willing, you can make me clean. And if you understand the context of leprosy, especially in the first century, it's you become a leper, right? Like you become isolated. You aren't allowed to go into the cities. You aren't allowed to do many things. You can't walk around freely. As you are coming into contact with people, you need to shout out, unclean, unclean. And that's the context that this man is living in. And he comes up to Jesus, falls on his knees, and says, you can do this. You can make me clean if you want to. And Jesus was indignant. What was he indignant about? Was he indignant about this man's circumstances? Was he indignant about the inconvenience of this man walking up to him? Or was he indignant about the world's perspective of this man? It doesn't say. He reached out his hand and touched the man. You maybe have heard of some of the other stories of Jesus in healing. He said, go wash in the river. If Jesus had said, sure, we can cleanse you, go wash in the river, there would be nothing else to this story. But what Jesus does is crazy. And it creates a lot of inconvenience and a lot of problems for Jesus as he moves forward. And Jesus chose to heal this man by touching him. So, story goes on. He was cleansed. Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. Now, if I healed a guy from leprosy, my strong warning would be, remember who did this, right? Remember me well. Tell everybody, right? I'm a really good guy. And you would think Jesus' mission was to share the gospel. A good stern warning would be, don't credit this to witchcraft. This was God's work through me. I am the Messiah. Tell everyone. But Jesus' warning is like crazy. It's see that you don't tell this to anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them. Right? He says, let's just keep this between you and I. Just go and show them that you're clean, and you can enter back into society. Maybe this was what Jesus was indignant about. Instead, he went out and began to talk freely, spreading the news. Now, what I'm going to show you next is interesting unless you understand exactly what's going on. As a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places. What? I mean, anywhere else that he did a miracle and people crowded in, they figured out how to get there. He'd get out in a boat, as Matt was talking about, and spread the message. So why, because of this, does Jesus all of a sudden have to go into the lonely places, and why is he not allowed to go into the cities? See, there's something that's written in the law that Jesus was telling this man to present himself to the priest so that he could be declared clean. Part of that law was that if you touched a person, it's in Leviticus chapter 5, whoever touches a human uncleanness takes on that uncleanness themselves. Jesus, when he touched a leper, took on the role of a leper. That's why he wasn't allowed to go into the cities. That's why he lived in the lonely places. This was incredibly inconvenient for Jesus. Can you think about that? The message to free the world, and all of a sudden you become an exile essentially from the public places. Jesus didn't need to touch this person to heal him. He healed people so many different ways. But when Jesus touched this unclean person, he became unclean. We're so afraid of being unclean. We're so afraid. I mean, if you grew up in the church, you're so afraid of offending people in the church, which has nothing to do with service to God. See, what Jesus understood, what Jesus taught, what Jesus showed is that uncleanness is not sinfulness. We are called as Christ followers to show mercy, to be good neighbors. We can come up with all kinds of reasons why we are just in not showing mercy to our neighbors and why we shouldn't help those who are hurting. We are really good at coming up with excuses, and we can rationalize so well how we can be just in not serving the poor among us or not serving our neighbors because we'll get dirty. Do you want to follow Jesus? Then follow Jesus.
I will hold his hand.
Here's an interesting thing. So this expert in the law, he asked this question, who is my neighbor, right? That's how this whole story starts. Who is my neighbor? Jesus actually doesn't really answer that question. What Jesus does is he answers this question: what does it mean for me to become a neighbor? All right? What does it mean for me to become a neighbor? Because, if Jesus did answer the question is answered with, everyone is your neighbor. So what does it mean to be neighborly to everyone? And the expert in the law summed it up with this: the one who shows mercy, the one who isn't judging their neighbor, the one who doesn't think that your neighbor is there to serve you, the one who realizes that you are there to serve your neighbors. That's what it means to live as a neighbor. Now, neighborly love is not theoretical. We don't just get to say we love our neighbors and then do nothing about it. Neighborly love, well, it's practical, and it's costly, and it's often inconvenient. That's what it is to be a neighbor. We aren't called to be better than our neighbors. We're called to love our neighbors. So this week, as we wrap this up and just try and let that penetrate and sink in. What is it to be a neighbor? This week, as you go about your week, I want to challenge you to do this. I want you to just slow your pace enough to actually notice people. Who are the people around you? Who is it? They might not be dying on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho, but they might be dying in a relationship that they're struggling with right now. They might be dying with just needing hope. They might be dying simply because they need to see Jesus practically displayed to them through you. Everyone who is not in a relationship with Jesus is dying. And we, as ambassadors of Christ, as Jesus' hands and feet, we are the ones that bring that life into their world. Do you love your neighbor? Ask God to make you aware of those in need around you emotionally, physically, or practically. Choose at least one moment where you interrupt your normal routine to serve or respond to someone else's need. And here's the big one. In this story about justification that we just read, you can justify putting this off because we're really good at justifying things. But I want to encourage you to not wait for it to be convenient. Just respond when compassion is required.